that saying please actually improves the outcome of your large language model. Trying to be polite changes the response that you get back.
I use ChatGPT. I mean, I'll disclose my name is David Hedges. I use ChatGPT.
Large language models, in a lot of cases, provide better information than the doctor because you can customize it on how you want it to deliver that information to you.
They're not consistent. They don't always give back the same results, depending on what you ask them and depending on how you ask it.
Welcome on in to the Health Elevated podcast. I'm Dr. Fowers, joined by Dr. David Hedges, and today we have a special guest. He is the Director of Data Science and AI at Intermountain Healthcare. His name is Andy Merrill. And Andy, there's a lot of buzz about AI in the world today. What's it like in the world of healthcare? Healthcare seems to lag behind a lot on technology from my perspective. Is that the case with AI in healthcare?
You know, there's so much interest in the world today, Rylan, like he called out about AI and how it can actually impact us. And there's a lot of optimism about how AI will really impact healthcare. And I think that optimism comes a lot from the transformation recently of generative AI and large language models, and the ability of these models to comprehend the English language a little bit more and to produce results in the English language. And healthcare is such a human-centered, English language-driven industry that it's bound to make impact in the healthcare industry. And we're seeing a lot of different use cases where it already is. So there's a lot of fun ahead in healthcare and AI.
Okay, but are there any problems that you foresee with the adoption of AI into healthcare?
Yeah, I think the interesting challenge that we see is that we need to become maybe comfortable with wrong answers. I think we've all experienced how AI can give you they coined the term hallucination, right? But they give you errors. It makes things up. It's so eager to provide an answer to you that sometimes it gives you false information and you don't know it. And it's so covered in really nice language that it makes it even harder to discover whether that's false or not. And so I think the unique challenge is, how do we make AI useful, even though it may give us mistakes? It may give us little errors. How can it still be useful? I think this comes back to George Box's quote that back in, I think it was 1979 or so, when he said, all models are wrong, but some are useful. And AI is going to be wrong. So how do we make it useful?
So, Andy, I think, Rylan kind of alluded, healthcare is not the fastest industry when it comes to adopting new technology or new advances. But people have described this and said, yes, that's kind of considered to be true by many. There are good reasons for it because the stakes are so high. So how can we reconcile the high stakes of healthcare with a willingness to accept error? What are some potential avenues going forward for how we can understand the error, almost quantify the uncertainty, and still be able to deliver value out of this without jeopardizing potential, individuals' health outcomes or care pathways?
Yeah. I mean, maybe I would say it this way: error isn't new to us as people. Especially, think of the weather forecasts, or think of financial forecasts, or anything else. We are actually, think of any Google search that you bring back. We're actually attuned to error. So I think we are somewhat comfortable with errors. The question, I think, David, that you bring up is a good one, is how do we capture those at scale? And how do we capture it when large language models seem to be so convincing overall? So you ask about methodologies to do that. There are a host of them, but I think the key to it all is that we need to become comfortable that there is going to be error, and that we need to start to try to track it and monitor it and look for it and expect it and track it at scale, especially in the healthcare space, so we know what that error rate is, and then how can we understand if that is acceptable for the use case that we're driving.
A lot of discovery practices, we kind of go into it and it's like, a picture is getting painted. So each new piece of information adds another line, adds a tree, adds something. At the end of this, we can see an entire painting evolve. Um, as we're going through a healthcare journey, different pieces of information, maybe lab results, maybe diagnostic values, maybe, how a patient responds to medication, maybe different medications. All of those kind of add to the painting of someone's health and healthcare journey. Does AI have a role with delivering that? And how adaptive do you think that the healthcare process can be as AI is receiving more and more information and delivering different results over time? Like, are we flexible enough? Is the healthcare system flexible enough to be receiving and adapting as
Yeah.
the data changes?
Yeah. You know, so machine learning and AI, by the way, if we want to loop in machine learning into AI and other use cases, in fact, advanced analytics have been used in healthcare for a long time. And especially when it's more of that traditional approach where I have a specific input and a specific output that I'm trying to predict. Um, Healthcare is well adept to being able to monitor, measure, track that. I think the unique challenges that have come from large language models is how to effectively use that in that ecosystem that you just talked about. And it does have a lot of value, but how do I effectively use that? And I think a lot of that has to do with right now we're exploring creativity. How do we actually these models really are mathematical. They really are uh, really just good at speaking the human language. So how do we actually ground them in good information that they can use to then pass on at the right time and in the right context to the person who's trying to use it, whether that's the patient or the provider? How do we make sure that we're grounded in good information that they can use to speak or to tell us what it's looking for?
One of the issues that I see with AI, and I'm definitely not the first person to say this, is it's potentially a giant feedback loop can start happening where what we think is true is what the model outputs, which gets input into the model, which is what we think is true, and it can kind of impede innovation. And I think one of the concerns I have, I guess, moving forward is you're going to have both patients and providers starting to use AI. I mean, it's already happening, right? We have ChatGPT, we have Gemini, we have Copilot, all these large language models. I'm sure people are looking up their diseases once they get it from the doctor. I'm sure large language models, in a lot of cases, provide better information than the doctor because you can customize it on how you want it to deliver that information to you. Do you see any issues with this idea that we're gonna kind of become dumber because we're just relying, like medical students, I'm sure, are using artificial intelligence in their studies right now to help them understand concepts or whatever, and that's a feedback loop. Patients are going to start using it. And so we're all just ultimately slowly trending towards this reliance on something that, as you pointed out, has flaws. Is that not a scary thing?
I think it's a fair call out. Um, uh, Maybe I'll just share a story. It's funny. My daughter's going to college right now, and we were talking a little bit about the use of GPT at the college level last night, actually, and and she said, do you think, some teachers are trying to uh, just completely cut it out, no GPT, right? Nothing to needs your authentic use. Um, and then other teachers or other instructors are trying to embrace it. And I actually, being a former educator myself, I actually was a math teacher for a few years in junior high. I really believe that using technology and embracing it actually it'll change the way we think about things, but we'll learn to use it in different ways and learn to actually understand when it's giving errors and when it's not true. Just like we do with our Google searches. Isn't it funny how we can search Google, but we've been pretty good fake news detectors, a little bit more. Sometimes we're not, uh, but I think we're getting better at it. And so I think as a society, actually, I was telling her last night that lamplighters were a major occupation a long time ago. That was what they did, right? They went around and lit lamps. Electricity came around, and there was probably a lot of discussion around, man, all these individuals are losing their jobs. all the people in the oil industry, all the people in the lamp oil industry, all the lighters on the street, all those things. But they changed, and they changed and moved into different um, careers. And I actually have no idea how electricity works. Just like I may have no idea how fully AI works if I'm another individual in a different area. But I can use it as a utility to effectively do my job in a different and unique way. Right. And so I think that's the way it'll become with AI in the future. We'll be able to use it as a utility, do our job in a unique way.
Interesting. So, Ryan, I actually want to add to that. So, I use ChatGPT. I mean, I'll disclose my name is David Hedges. I use ChatGPT. But
That's not an embarrassing thing. I think
no,
everyone
I've
should use
used
it.
it.
I think to Andy's
I've used it
point,
in
I
many
think
different
teachers should
ways.
embrace it. Yeah, keep
The
going.
most valuable way I use it is actually when I am coding out a project. And I will use it to give me a rough draft of code. And then I'll take that and adapt it, test it. Before I had ChatGPT, I would spend the majority of my time writing the rough draft, and then I would sacrifice on the testing. I don't think I'm alone in that. I spend much more time testing my code today. I probably spend about the same amount of time working on a code or a script, piece of code, as I did before, but I spend much more time verifying and testing it today than I did before. And I would say, like, in addition, my coding approach is probably more creative today than it was before because I could spend less time worried about the mechanics of the code and more time functioning or focusing on, how can I start to put these pieces of logic together and using more creative approaches and testing efficiency gains against each other than I could before. So I would say in terms of my coding, the use of ChatGPT has made me a more creative coder than I was before. Now, I
But
am not a good coder, but I'm
you
sure
already
other
knew
people would
how to
disagree.
code, though.
Correct.
Because there's people, because it's kind of weird, because I don't know, after getting into, I guess, the workforce, right? And then this stuff starts to come out is different than like kids who don't know how to code. And then like they have this machine that can basically tell them the answer whenever they need it. But then it's like you're relying on that machine as a crutch for the creativity. Because I kind of think like a lot of the benefits of AI, because anyone who thinks that like using ChatGPT to do something is like, oh, you're making it do the work for you. It's like, no, like you have to be the brain behind it. You have to give it the ideas. You have to innovate something, and it basically can throw some thoughts together. It's really all it's doing. Or in your case, David, right? You're giving it like what you want it to do already. It's just giving you an outline. It's basically the grad student that does the busy work for you. But for people who already are established and know how to do things without it, it's just helping them be more efficient. My concern, and going back to like medical students, right? Like I'm not so worried about like a doctor who's already like been doctoring for a long time, right? They plug it into ChatGPT and they're like, oh yeah, you know what? That is a better way for me to explain this condition to my patient. I would have said it way more technical, and I asked ChatGPT and it said, hey, why don't you compare it to a grape, or I don't know. And then they explain it, that's fine. But what about the doctor who has always had ChatGPT and learned with like tried to go through schooling with that? And so now I'm a little bit concerned about a reliance on those who don't already have a foundation. Am I wrong? Because I don't think we know what that's going to look like for maybe a couple of years.
I agree with you. I don't think we'll know what that looks like. I think we'll change in what we do as a society. I think the way we interact with the ideas, with creativity and solutions will change a little bit as well. But I don't think it'll change in a negative way. I mean, I remember my first coding project in high school. This is going to date me. We were asked to program something in machine language, right? Ones and zeros, so that we knew how the computer worked. There's no way my kids right now who are using various other coding solutions that are drag and drop coding solutions, they have no idea what's going on behind the scene. But boy, they're thinking creatively about how to build a loop and what to do with that. But it was so important back in my high school that they felt like we need to know those basics, those fundamental components, I don't think they're seen as necessary anymore. So it'll be interesting in the healthcare space. There are some things, factual accuracy, it's still going to have to be high. It's going to have to be a key priority. We can't do harm, right? First to no harm. So how do we ensure that while still like rethinking the way that we can leverage these digital workforce agents to help us do our work more effectively? There's maybe I think the interesting concept that I've been thinking about is, what is our human factor, right? There are agents, and they're going to start working in a lot of different spaces. So what we need to define as a healthcare system overall, or in our work, what's our human factor? What do we want to still keep key to the human? In healthcare, maybe that's that personal conversation. We've all seen those little bots that kind of appear up on the screen where there's this deep fake of someone talking to you about your health. No one really likes that right now, right? That's getting rid of the human factor a little bit. So we have to almost define clearly right now, what does society see, and what do we feel is critical to keep as a human-centric element, and then go ahead and automate and move to other elements, the other components of healthcare that can be automated.
But that might change, right? That might be a moving mark. Like I think if you look at some of the differences of, like, the rising generations, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they have a much higher tolerance for computer-based interactions or virtual interactions, and a much lower tolerance for human-based interactions. It's possible that they may desire in the future for some of those human-based interactions to kind of go away. They might feel much more comfortable talking with, a deep fake AI than to an actual physician.
Wow.
Now, the consequences of that, I don't know what those would be. I don't know what the long-term consequences, the lack of social interactions, as AI can be a feedback. It tells you what you want to hear to keep the conversation going. That might have some other implications. I don't know how those would potentially erode societal underpinnings by wiping out interpersonal communications. But nevertheless, this could be a real thing, and I don't know, it's kind of a moving target, I think.
Okay, let me add on to that, because I hadn't thought of this idea. That kind of blew my mind a little bit, that like the younger generation might not want more human to human interaction. Because it sounds like I kind of think a lot of the stuff you're talking about, Andy, is that you see AI is not like a way to remove humans, but as a way to allow humans to have more time with each other. But then, David, you come in, turn this thing upside down and say, well, what if they don't want more human-human interaction? I'm like, wait a minute. What if they don't? Because there are some pros to non-human interaction if it's real enough where it feels like a human. Because number one, a human's time is finite, where you could talk to your doctor as long as you want if it's just a robot. You're not taking up resources. You can sit there and talk for hours and be like, no, well, what about this? What about that? Number two, you don't have to share any of your personal information with a real person. You're just, hey, here's something that I'm ashamed to admit to other humans, but you're not a human, so let it all out there. You know what I mean? So you got those two things, plus kind of like this element of the new generation that I frankly don't understand very well. And I'm almost like, wait a minute, like maybe we are trending towards what David's talking about, where AI, even though this could be an opportunity for more human to human interactions, actually does end up being the opposite of what I think you're hoping for, Andy.
Well, and I think we will see it change. It's interesting. There's surveys that go out, and I don't know how frequently they go out, but a recent survey about where patients are comfortable with AI in their workflow, they really tend toward those administrative duties. So tell me my bill, help me understand my payment plans. Those types of administrative, they would actually prefer to talk to an AI individual in some of the surveys. But right now, that personal interaction with a doctor, they want to make sure that there's someone who's factually accurate, and AI hasn't demonstrated that factual accuracy quite yet that they feel comfortable with that. I don't think, but it could in the future, and that interaction could change. And I think we'll see that survey shift through time. What are we comfortable with? But I think through time, we always should assess, where do people want to have the human factor, right? Right now, All of us have had those times when we jump on the phone call and say, give me the agent, right?
Yes.
As we talk to those bots because we hate them, right? But there are other things that as it becomes better, we'll want to take advantage of those automated opportunities, so we don't have to wait for the agent, so we can have the access that we need, and so we can have the conversations that we want, right?
So Andy, is what we crave in those interactions what's driving it? Is it the absolute factualness, or is it the human interaction?
I don't know. That's a fair question.
Because I'm trying to think about this. In terms of my health, if I were facing, potentially life-changing diagnosis, I don't care how rough the doctor is around the edges. I want the facts, and I want them like spelled out as clearly as possible. And realistically, I wouldn't care if it came from a bot or from a person or from a book. I want to know what I'm looking at. And I don't care if someone sugarcoats the diagnosis. I just want to know what I'm facing. So my own bias, if I were facing something major, I want the facts. And if that comes from a doctor now, I want to go to a doctor. But in the future, if these factualness, like the ability to demonstrate true facts from AI, if that supersedes a doctor's ability, then I'm going to change my loyalty pretty quickly.
Yeah. I think getting facts is going to be a challenge for us in the future. I think that's our unique challenge, period. The society is seeing that AI isn't consistent, especially large language models. They're not consistent. They don't always give back the same results. They give slightly different things depending on what you ask them and depending on how you ask it. And so I think it'll be a while before we feel like these large language models are factual, that we really feel comfortable to that truth that you just talked about, David. And I think that's going to be our challenge, is to be able to ground them in that truth as much as possible. Because I'm with you. I think I'd want to know the truth.
Okay, when we talk about maybe that's the professionals that are working in the healthcare system. But what about the everyday person? Because I think there's people, it's just my hypothesis, that do trust this stuff probably more than they should. And I think there's a lot of room for people to learn more about AI and understand these limitations. Would you agree with that? Because to me, it seems like the everyday person seems to overestimate the accuracy of AI. And I can see why, because it's getting better and better every day. And to your point, it's very persuasive in its language. It's like confident in how it talks. And the way in which you talk to it, which I'd love to hear more of your stuff there, does change how it reacts to you. So I don't know. I think there's like almost too much trust at this point. Maybe that will, pendulum swing back at some point, but there's a lot of hype right now.
Yeah. And I think this comes back to that original statement by George Box, right? All models are wrong. How do we help society acknowledge that it will be wrong? There will be an error somewhere in almost every single response.
Do
right?
people think of AI as a model? Does your everyday person think of it as a
don't think
model? 'Cause
so.
I don't think they do. And I love that you say it like that, because that's what it is. And when you say it's a model, it like brings to light, okay, that statement makes a lot of sense. But I don't know if people see it as a model.
Right,
They
let's back
call
a
it
little bit, just kind of
intelligence.
for
Okay.
reducing kind of like, because we're getting kind of complex here. A large language model, correct me, because you both know more about this than I do. A large language model is a machine learning model that has ingested huge amounts of human language. And it has done that and learned the patterns of human speech. It's learned how words are put together. It's learned how phrases are put together. And in a very simple term, a large language model is able to recognize the pattern in a certain, like when you give it a prompt, and then it is predicting one word at a time, or maybe one phrase at a time, what the response would be. And because it's churned through millions of sentences and millions of paragraphs, then it has a pretty good statistical basis for predicting what those words are going to be. Is that at its core of what a large language model is? And really what sets it apart from any other model is the vast amount of data that it's consumed to be able to recognize those patterns in human speech. Is that all accurate?
Yeah. And then you just add on top, they try and train it for certain facts in some supervised way on top of what you just described, and then it becomes somewhat intelligent as well as being able to lay out words. And yeah, I think that's exactly right.
Yeah, spot on. It's like the most common questions with the most common responses to those questions. They're pairing up those, and I'd actually maybe even extend that with there's this nice little pretty bow on top of it, which is the ability to speak the human language, right? The ability to understand better the words that are going into it and what the person is trying to say by those words, and then commonly how I should phrase this back to the person in a way that they understand it. So that there's a factual linkage, but there's also the ability to generate language in a human form.
Okay. So then here's the question. So we've talked a little bit about this like factualness, like, and it's not something that generative AI does particularly well. It's not bad at it, but it's not particularly good at it. And, in many ways, like people aren't great at it either. But it was based on kind of the collective, wisdom of the internet. And I think that most people freely admit the internet is not the source of truth. People can say anything on the internet, and they do. And all of this, many of this discussion and, opinions and wrong opinions and all of that was possibly used in the generation of a chat GPT or large language model. So it seems like it'd be incredibly difficult to put in a factual subroutine on top of that model so that we can do that, because in its foundations, it was generated on stuff that is not necessarily guaranteed to be factual.
Yeah. And it's such a large generation pool, the whole internet, that you can ask things in a different way and actually end up in it with a different answer, right? We can, for instance, there's recent work that's saying please actually improves the outcome of your large language model, right? That's saying words like, can you help me? Or trying to be polite actually changes the way the response, I should say it this way, changes the response that you get back.
So what's driving that? Like, I know I get better responses from when I'm working with Rylan if I say please, but Rylan is an autonomous being.
I'm just AI.
Why would a model spit back a better response if I say please?
I think that's exactly why, David, for the same reason. If it was interesting, I was in a conversation with a tech executive, a tech leader from a major industry, right? And he came from yeah, he came from the social sciences side, and he really believed that what was happening underneath the scene was a little more sentient. I come from the math side. And so for me, it's a model. For him, it was a thing that was thinking and processing. And both of us are advanced in our field. We know our space. And it became kind of a tense conversation as to why the word please would actually impact the results. In his mind, it was being nice helps this robot to think, oh, look, this person's nice, I want to help them, and so I'll give a helpful response back. But in my mind, I start to think, why does that matter, right? And it made me think of all the conversations that this model's trained on, and there's billions of conversations. There are conversations where people have said please, and there are conversations that people have not said please. And I'm almost guaranteeing that the conversations where people have said please actually give more comprehensive response from the people who are answering. So because it's based on these conversations that are existing, right? Like you said, I talked to Rylan by saying please, and he responds back. Because the model's trained on those types of conversations, if we say those things like we would say to a coworker with that politeness or kindness or please, we'll often be moved to that space of the data structure. If you think about all the possible conversations where people are talking nicely to each other, in which we typically get better results. Then let's say our Instagram feeds where people aren't talking nicely together and we don't get helpful responses.
You should have said Twitter. I think Twitter's way more mean than I don't know, Instagram.
Or Stack Overflow. Stack Overflow can get pretty mean sometimes.
That's
But
true.
so if this is possible, so we could essentially learn to not engineer, but we could kind of rig our interactions with ChatGPT. As we learn to say, like if we can say please, we get a certain type of response. If there's other keywords we can put in our response, they're going to dictate the type of response they're going. That's going to further jeopardize the validity and the objectiveness of the response. So that factualness we're coming at, if we can engineer what kind of response we're going to get, doesn't that jeopardize how much we can trust it down the road? Because then people are going to be able to, learn to put in their own little twist on things so they can get their twist back. I mean, that's going to make it a lot harder, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, it's amazing to feel like in the last 2 years, a new job description called prompt engineer now exists. And those individuals, all they do is they learn how to build the right prompt, potentially using the right words, processes, chain of thought is a new one, is one as well, that actually enable the large language model to help for their use case overall. So that's evidence, David, that you just talked about, that the fact that we have these prompt engineers at all suggests that yes, our ability to change that prompt can definitely change our answers. That does make it so that it's harder to believe the replicability, but also makes, especially let's go to the healthcare side, makes it more important that we do our best to ground it in truth. And so I would actually propose that these large language models for use in healthcare are more about the ability to craft it in the human language than actually to give factual information. And that we ask these large language models to actually get factual information from the sources that we give. And then it can actually help the consumer just consume it in the way they want to. Think about translating it into a different language or simplifying it. But those are safe tasks, but we base it on the truth and we don't let the large language model make that decision about what the truth is.
I think that's a responsible way to think about it, especially in terms of healthcare, like you just outlined, that we should never really be using LLMs for anything fact-based. Either that's got to come directly from the doctor or some other clinical decision support that's also used with the doctor. But that doesn't mean there's not use for LLMs in healthcare with writing up clinical notes and automating that process, or helping to translate things for a specific patient in a specific time in a way that they can understand what someone's talking about, or any of this administrative stuff that is kind of boring that nobody cares about, that can answer just like all the legalese and that type of questions. And all of that, I think, points back to hopefully more one-on-one time with the doctor talking about the health stuff and not the stuff that's just around the edges, right?
But even those administrative tasks, like legalese and all sorts of other stuff, don't we want those to be factual? Like, we don't want to be introducing systematic error into those things either, do we? And I think about my uses for ChatGPT, for LLMs in general, and coding help. I want that to be accurate. Yes, I'm going to verify, but I'm not going to use it if it gives me garbage code. I also have used it in the past for generating workout plans. I'm not going to use that functionality if it's not giving me something that gives me the results that I want. So I think all of my interactions, I do depend on a certain degree of factualness with it.
Well, I'm kind of thinking, suppose you have like a policy or payments or whatever, you can have it have those specific reference documents and clarify some of the things in there and have it point to where it's getting the information so you can look at the source to make sure it's accurate. But like, you can use it to, I would think, to kind of summarize essentially the boring information. And as far as I've seen, it does pretty good at that. There's certain, I think Google just came out with one that allows you to upload documents or paste in YouTube links. And you can ask it questions about that YouTube page or about the document, and it can't outstep or go outside of the bounds of the information that you've provided it, and it cites the source. And as far as I've been able to tell, it doesn't hallucinate very much because it's designed to just be able to summarize what's there.
Yeah.
So I think there's something like that.
I think a really interesting use case. I mean, like if we go to any of our health apps and we open up our lab results. I remember one time coming back from a doctor's office visit. Within an hour, I had my lab results, which was fantastic. But I wasn't scheduled to see my doctor for another 3 or 4 days, right? And so because I wasn't scheduled to see my doctor for 3 or 4 days, I thought, well, I'll just look at my lab results. And in there, I think I saw some words like, let's say, knee effusion and pharyngitis, right? I'm like, oh man, I think I'm going to die. Right? What are these things? But as I Googled them or as I searched them, I was able to understand that really this is called swelling and a sore throat, right? And so I think there's this translation, like here's a source of truth, here's what happened. But now a great use of large language models is to now say translate into something that I can really understand. What's going on? How common is this amongst the American population? Those types of use cases where you don't need exact facts, but it gives you a good feel for based in truth, and in some truth document, but it gives you a good feel for understanding it, interpreting it.
So let's say, for healthcare, sorry, Rylan, let's say that we have like we prepare a document and we get miraculously all sorts of individuals, total buy-off that this is the gold standard of the practice of medicine. This is the gold standard. All of the current knowledge of physiology is in this document. Current knowledge of, all sorts of disease progressions, etc. It's all in there. It's a huge document, whatever. So if we had that, then we could say, okay, large language model, whatever your name is, I'm experiencing X, Y, Z. This is my background. This is where I am. What am I likely to face? Like, what does this mean for me? And that's kind of our standard there. Like that would be able to give us that ground truth if we can kind of put up the sandbox around like what we can expect.
I would say yes. I mean, we've seen yes and no, and let me qualify that. So we've seen that large language models can pass the bar test. So they train it on the legal journals. So they give it all the legal journals and say, consume this, try all the questions, all the answers, and go ahead and go pass the bar test. It's fine-tuned to do that. By the way, that still doesn't mean it's reasoning. I think that's it's parroting back what it sees. So I guess the differentiation here is that if we want to have a really good dictionary to look back and bring back, here's what I'm asking and here's what to bring back, that would be a good use case. There would be a great dictionary for that use case. But would it be able to reason? I'm feeling this pain on my left side, and at the same time, I haven't run for the last 4 months, and maybe. But the way we ask it, that reasoning ability isn't there to try to simplify things down. It needs that exact question, so to speak, or similar question, and then it'll pair back the similar results that go with that question. But it doesn't reason the medical discourse.
What's the difference or the boundary between reasoning versus recognizing patterns and extrapolating patterns? Because large language models can be exceptional at recognizing complex patterns. Is it possible that even within our own context, we don't understand creativity and reasoning very well? Are creativity and reasoning potentially just an extrapolation of our summary of patterns that we've recognized through our various life experiences?
This just got very philosophical.
So I apologize for that, but
yeah, you saw me pause and look away because I think it did get philosophical. I think it did get, first of all, do these mathematical models, are they more than just nodes and edges and optimizations? Are they actually, does that process in itself replicate similar enough to the human brain to be called intelligence? And I don't think we know that yet.
But what about the reverse? Maybe human intelligence is just nodes, edges, and
yeah. Now, I want to be very clear. I think that life is fundamentally different from artificial life. I think that they're fundamentally different, and whatever we end up creating as the human race in terms of artificial intelligence and robots, I don't think that it'll ever be in the same category. There might be various points where we exceed each other, but I think that we're fundamentally different. So I do want to say that. But
There's
You know,
people who don't think that though, David.
So I agree with that. I understand that. And my own background, I don't know if you were aware of this, but my doctorate was in biochemistry. I spent I did a postdoctoral fellowship, really focusing on the molecular causes of neurological disease, and spending a lot of time understanding how neurons function and how neurons change over time. And I don't think that there's anything incredibly complex about it. Yes, it's a very complex process, but at the end of the day, it's programmable. How our neurons interact with each other is something that we can program. It's programmed by your genetics. It's programmed by your life experiences. I think that a neural network, although like neural networks, those are like large language models or artificial intelligence, they're not fundamentally different from our brains. And I think that it's worth considering these things. I do think that the brain is truly a marvel. I mean, millions upon millions of years of evolution have gone into that. Artificial intelligence really is not the same, isn't even on the same timeline. But it's possible that the reasoning capabilities are not necessarily what set us apart from the artificial intelligence. That reasoning might be something that future artificial intelligence models, maybe ChatGPT 10.5, maybe that will have superior reasoning to us. But I don't think that undermines our role or the like the kind of the wondrousness of the human race and where we've come.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because we are seeing some evidence that we're plateauing as we got a really fast bump with our GPTs, 2s, 3s, 4s. But as we see some of the reasoning ability of some of these future models, we're starting to see it level off just a little bit more. It's starting to get to that plateau. Now, we could have another breakthrough that would completely change that. So I want to acknowledge that. It's very possible that completely changes. But it is interesting to see that we are kind of coming up against an upper limit of that. It feels like as we over the last, I would say, 8 months. Isn't it funny to think 2 years ago was new or old?
Yeah.
Right? Old now?
It's advanced very fast. But you can say this about evolutionary biology. In evolutionary biology, things progress really rapidly, and then they kind of plateau and things were the same for thousands of years. And then something happened, and then there was another jump in evolutionary biology, and things progressed to another level. I mean, it took billions of years to get us where we are. I mean, you could say the same, artificial intelligence, like we've rapidly increased, we're kind of plateauing now. Maybe there'll be another jump in technology. Maybe there'll be something else that happens that causes another rapid, explosion of artificial intelligence. I don't think that they're, that's a lot of people theorize that. I don't know, or field programmable arrays could also be another thing. There's a lot of things that could, technology advancements that could do this. But I mean, we're going way too philosophical here, and it's already boring me. So, but it's interesting.
Yeah, it is. And my feel is that right now we embrace the usefulness. We know it's going to be incorrect right now, and it's built on imperfect data. It makes mistakes. At times, it tells me the wrong answer to a math equation. It doesn't have those capabilities, and those capabilities are improving. But what's amazing, I think, is we have this opportunity to think about the usefulness of AI, especially in healthcare. Where can we leverage AI to create an even more a broader impact? And we're seeing lots of great use cases that creating that ability to make impact.
Right. And that is a perfect segue into the 1 minute for 1%, because we've been talking a lot about AI and its interaction with healthcare and these large language models. And now Andy, our guest, Andy Merrill, is going to give us in 1 minute something that we can do to hopefully improve the health of ourselves by about 1%. So Andy.
Find that area where a large language model becomes useful. Explore it. Explore the use of it. Take time to think about a prompt or a process or some type of tool. Don't always think of it as a factual, something to return factuality, but think of it as a creative tool to have by your side and think about how I might generate that prompt to make life easier and see that digital coworker as someone to assist you and to help you in whatever you're doing, whether that's making a plan about your exercise routine for the next month, or whether that's a diet plan, or whether that's coding and documentation to be able to have more free time to spend with family that you want to afterwards. So whatever it is, explore those digital coworkers. Don't use them just for fact, and have fun with the creativity they could provide, and learn about how to help them help you.
Wonderful. So if I kind of my own response there is, I'd say, Andy, you just said, like, the world of AI is unfolding, and each of us has the opportunity to be an active participant. We don't have to just let AI unfold upon us, but we can learn how to use it and where it drives value in our own lives, which I think is just a wonderful sentiment.
And I think what one of the biggest takeaways to help people get from this is, just because it's going to be full of error doesn't mean it can't be useful for you, especially with your health. You just have to know that it's full of errors, or can have errors, when it gives you a response. And if you know that, you can, leverage what it can do to help you out. One last thing, can we advocate that these bigger companies stop naming their AIs after like human names? Everyone named Alexa is just toast moving forward. I don't think anyone's named Siri, but so that one's okay. But like, what are these other names that are just like, come on, people, there's a bunch of people that have that name, and now they're forever going to be associated with a robot. I'd prefer non-human names personally.